A woman handed her phone to a stranger at a bus stop in Brooklyn. The call he made lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. He looked homeless, wrinkled clothes, trembling hands, eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. But inside his mind was an invention that 3 corporations were fighting over. That phone call was worth $2.4 million, and Mary had no idea. She had just saved the one thing that every lawyer, every courtroom, every billion-dollar company in the past 14 months could not save. She just thought she was being kind. 6:14 a.m., not 6, not 6:15, 6:14. Because Mary Okafor had figured out years ago that those extra 14 minutes of sleep were the difference between surviving the day and breaking down in a grocery store parking lot. Her alarm was not a gentle chime. It was the default iPhone sound, loud, aggressive, the kind of noise that pulls you out of whatever dream was keeping you safe. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. Cracked screen, case peeling at the corners, 11% battery. She had forgotten to charge it again. The charger cable in the kitchen had been half broken for 2 weeks, and a new one cost $12 she did not have to spare. Mary swung her legs off the bed. The apartment on Fulton Street was small. 2 bedrooms if you were generous. One was hers. The other belonged to Aisha, 9 years old, sharp eyes, smile that could fix almost anything. The kitchen floor was cold under Mary's bare feet. She opened the fridge. Eggs, 3 left. Half a carton of milk that was 1 day past its date but still smelled fine. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan. The third one she saved. That was tomorrow's breakfast. You learn to count like that when the numbers in your bank account never have enough digits. She checked her balance while the eggs cooked. $147.32. Rent was due in 9 days. $875. The math did not work. The math never worked. But Mary had been making impossible math work for 4 years now, and somehow the bills still got paid. Late. Always late, but paid. Mama, can I bring cupcakes for Destiny's birthday on Friday? Aisha appeared in the kitchen doorway, backpack already on, hair in 2 puffs that Mary had braided the night before while watching a show she could not remember the name of because she had fallen asleep halfway through. We will see, baby. Get your shoes on. That meant no. Aisha knew it. Mary knew she knew it. But neither of them said so. That was how they moved through mornings. Quiet negotiations, small mercies. The unspoken language of a family that had learned to want less so the disappointment would hurt less too. Mary slid the eggs onto a plate, poured a glass of milk, set it on the table, kissed the top of Aisha's head. Her daughter smelled like cocoa butter and the lavender detergent that was on sale last month. Bus comes in 20 minutes, Mary said. Eat fast. She walked back to the bedroom, pulled on her scrubs, light blue, faded at the elbows from washing. The name tag clipped to her chest read Mary O. Home Health Aide, Sunrise Senior Care Agency. She almost left the phone on the nightstand. 11%, barely enough to last till noon, and she would be with Mrs. Coleman all morning. No need for a phone when you are bathing an old woman and heating up soup. But something made her pick it up. Maybe habit. Maybe the feeling every mother has that the school might call, that Aisha might need her, that the one time you leave your phone behind will be the one time it matters. She dropped it into her scrub pocket. Aisha was already at the door, shoes on, backpack zipped. Love you, Mama. Love you more, baby girl. Learn something good today. The door closed. Aisha walked to PS 247 on Herkimer Street, 3 blocks. She had been walking it alone since 2nd grade because Mary's shift started at 7:30 and the school did not open until 7:45 and there was no one else to walk her. Mary locked the apartment, took the stairs because the elevator had been broken since March, stepped out onto Fulton Street where the morning air smelled like exhaust and fresh bread from the bakery on the corner that she could never afford to walk into. She headed for the B38 bus stop. Same stop, same route, same Tuesday as every other Tuesday for the past 3 years. Mary did not know it yet, but in exactly 3 hours and 41 minutes, that phone with 11% battery was going to change 2 lives forever. Mary Okafor was the kind of person who would give you directions even when she was running late. Hold a door open even when her arms were full. Let a stranger use her phone even when the battery was almost dead. And if you asked her why, she would just shrug and say something like, "That is how I was raised." But that was not the whole truth. The truth was heavier than that. The truth had a name: Terrence. Terrence Okafor, her husband, Aisha's father, the man who used to sing off key in the shower and burn pancakes every Sunday and call Mary his good thing. Not baby, not sweetheart, his good thing. Because he said she was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he was not about to pretend that a regular word could carry that weight. Terrence died 4 years ago on the Belt Parkway. He was driving home from a double shift at the warehouse in Canarsie. 11:30 at night. A truck ran a red light, hit the driver's side door. Terrence's car spun across 2 lanes and slammed into the guardrail. He was alive after the impact. Hurt bad, but alive. He reached for his phone to call 911. The screen lit up for half a second, then went black. Dead battery. Terrence sat in that crushed car on the side of the Belt Parkway, bleeding conscious, unable to call for help. For 11 minutes, no one stopped. Cars drove past, headlights swept over the wreck, and kept moving. 11 minutes of darkness and silence and blood, and no one pulling over. Then someone did. A man in a gray sedan, never got his name. He pulled over, saw Terrence through the shattered window, called 911 from his own phone. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes, fast by city standards. But Terrence had been bleeding for 17 minutes by then. 7 minutes too long. He died in the ambulance 2 blocks from Kings County Hospital. The paramedic told Mary later that if the call had come 7 minutes sooner, they could have made it in time. 7 minutes. That is how close Terrence came to walking through the front door that night, to singing in the shower the next morning, to burning pancakes on Sunday. 7 minutes and a dead phone battery. Mary never talked about it, not to her friends, not to the grief counselor the city offered for free, not to Aisha, who still asked sometimes why Daddy had to go to heaven when she was only 5 and had not finished showing him all her drawings yet. But Mary carried that night in her body, in her hands, in the way she flinched every time she heard a phone die, in the way she always said yes when someone asked to borrow hers. A stranger on the subway needing to text someone, a teenager at the bodega whose phone got stolen, an old man at the laundromat trying to call his daughter. Mary always said yes, every single time, because she knew. She knew in the deepest part of herself that sometimes a phone call is the only thing standing between someone and the worst moment of their life. And she would rather have a dead phone in her pocket than live with knowing she could have helped and did not. That was how Mary ended up as a home health aide. Not because she had dreamed of it, not because she had any particular passion for wiping down counters and sorting pill bottles and helping elderly people in and out of bathtubs. She ended up there because it was the most flexible job she could find without a college degree. A job that let her drop Aisha at school and still make it to her shift. A job that paid $14.65 an hour. No dental, no vision. 12 sick days a year that she could not afford to use. Her current patient was Mrs. Lorraine Coleman, 78 years old, former public school teacher, taught 4th grade in Bed-Stuy for 31 years. Now she lived alone in a rent-stabilized apartment on Green Street with a cat named Bishop and a bookshelf full of photo albums she could no longer see clearly enough to enjoy. Mary visited Mrs. Coleman 5 days a week, bathed her, cooked for her, made sure she took her blood pressure medication at 8 a.m. and her thyroid pill at noon. Read to her from the newspaper because Mrs. Coleman said the internet was not real news. Most days, Mary was the only person Mrs. Coleman spoke to. And most days, Mrs. Coleman was the closest thing Mary had to someone who took care of her back. Not physically, but in the way that only a retired teacher can. Asking how she slept, telling her she looked tired, insisting she sit down and eat something before she started cleaning. "You cannot pour from an empty cup, baby." Mrs. Coleman said that almost every morning. Mary would smile, nod, and keep pouring. Because that is what mothers do. That is what caregivers do. That is what women like Mary have always done. They give and give and give. And when someone finally asks who takes care of you, they change the subject. Now, let me take you back. 14 months before that morning at the bus stop, before the phone call, before the $2.4 million, before any of it, to a laboratory in Edison, New Jersey, where a man named Darryl Mabry was about to have the best day of his career, and he had no idea it would also be the beginning of the worst year of his life. Darryl Mabry was a biomedical engineer. Not the kind you see on magazine covers, not the kind with a TED Talk and a publicist, the quiet kind, the kind who showed up at 7 a.m. and left at 9 p.m. and spent the hours in between running filtration tests that no one outside his department understood or cared about. He worked at Hartley Medical Systems, a mid-sized biotech company in a beige office park off Route 1, the kind of building you drive past 1,000 times without ever wondering what happens inside. What happened inside in Darryl's case was something extraordinary. For 3 years, Darryl had been developing a biofiltration membrane, a thin, flexible sheet made from modified cellulose fibers that could filter bacteria, parasites, and heavy metals from contaminated water. Other filters existed. Darryl knew that, but they cost between $8 and $15 per unit and lasted maybe 6 months. Darryl's membrane cost under $2 to produce, and it lasted 2 years. Let me put that in perspective. Right now, roughly 2 billion people on this planet do not have access to clean drinking water. Every single day, more than 1,000 children under the age of 5 die from diseases caused by contaminated water, diarrhea, cholera, typhoid. Diseases that should not be killing anyone in a world with this much technology. The problem was never knowledge. The problem was cost. Clean water technology existed, but getting it to the communities that needed it most was too expensive, too complicated, too far from the people making decisions in air-conditioned boardrooms. Darryl's membrane changed that equation. One sheet could filter enough water for a family of 5, for 2 years, for under $2. That was not just an invention, that was a lifeline. A bridge between survival and death for millions of people who had been waiting for someone to care enough to build it. And Darryl had built it. With his own hands. Long, careful hands that could hold a membrane sample thinner than a human hair without tearing it. Hands that wrote equations on whiteboards at midnight and sketched prototypes on napkins during lunch. Hands that belonged to a man who had grown up in Newark, son of a bus driver and a school cafeteria worker, first in his family to go to college, and now the owner of a patent application that could reshape global health. He developed the membrane on his own time, nights, weekends, using his personal laptop and equipment he had purchased with his own savings. The research was his, the breakthroughs were his. The 3 years of failed experiments and sleepless nights and moments of doubt where he almost gave up, all his. His boss, Victor Hartley, had started asking questions around month 20, casual at first. "How is that side project going, Darryl? Anything interesting? You should show me your data sometime. I would love to take a look." Darryl had trusted him. Victor was the one who hired him, gave him his first real shot after 2 other companies passed, called him brilliant in front of the whole department. Darryl showed Victor everything: the data, the prototypes, the patent application he was preparing to file. He thought he was sharing his work with a mentor. He was handing it to a thief. It was a Monday morning in October when Darryl arrived at Hartley Medical Systems and knew immediately that something was wrong. The parking lot was the same. The building was the same. The security guard at the front desk was the same man who nodded at Darryl every morning for 3 years. But this morning the guard did not nod. He looked away. Darryl swiped his badge at the turnstile. The light flashed red. He swiped again. Red again. He looked at the guard. "There seems to be a problem with my badge." The guard picked up the phone, made a quiet call. 2 minutes later, a woman from Human Resources appeared. Daryl had seen her around but never spoken to her. She was carrying a folder and wearing the kind of expression people wear when they have practiced bad news in the mirror. "Mr. Mabry, would you come with me, please?" The conference room on the second floor had a long table, 8 chairs, and a window that looked out at the parking lot where Daryl's 12-year-old Honda Civic sat waiting for him. There was a cardboard box on the table. His cardboard box, his coffee mug, his framed degree from Rutgers. The photo of his parents at his graduation. They had already packed his things. The HR woman explained that Daryl was being terminated effective immediately for violation of company confidentiality protocols. She read from a script. Her voice was flat, professional. She did not make eye contact. Daryl barely heard her, because his mind was doing math. Terrible math. The kind that adds up to betrayal. Victor Hartley walked in halfway through the meeting. He sat across from Daryl, adjusted his tie, folded his hands on the table like a man who had already won. "I want you to know, this was not personal," Victor said. "The company has a right to protect its intellectual property. Your work on the filtration project falls under the scope of your employment agreement." "I developed that membrane on my own time," Daryl said. "On my own equipment. At my own kitchen table. You know that, Victor. You saw my home lab setup. I showed you photographs." Victor's expression did not change. The legal team reviewed the situation thoroughly. "The company's position is clear. You stole my work. I would be very careful with language like that, Daryl. Very careful. Here is what most people do not know about intellectual property law in the United States. When you sign an employment contract with a company, there is often a clause buried deep in the fine print. It is called a work-for-hire provision. And what it says is that anything you invent while employed by the company belongs to the company, even if you did it on your own time, even if you used your own equipment, even if the idea had nothing to do with your job description. Now, there are exceptions. Important ones. In many states, if you can prove that you developed your invention entirely outside of work, using no company resources, and the invention is not related to the company's current business, it belongs to you, not them, you. Daryl's membrane fell into that exception. He had developed it at home, on his own laptop, with materials he purchased himself. The receipts were in a shoebox under his bed. The research notes were on his personal hard drive. But Victor Hartley had already filed a patent application under the company's name, and he had done something clever. He had listed the invention as an extension of an existing Hartley medical project, a water purification initiative that the company had abandoned 2 years earlier but never officially closed. On paper, it looked like Daryl's membrane was company work, a continuation of a company project. Developed during company time, it was a lie. But it was a well-constructed lie, the kind that requires expensive lawyers to take apart. Daryl stood up, picked up his box, looked at Victor one last time. "You know what this filter can do. You know how many people it can help. And you stole it so you could put your name on it and sell it to the highest bidder." Victor said nothing. Daryl walked out of the building, stood in the parking lot. October wind cutting through his jacket. He looked up at the third-floor window, his lab, his bench, his 3 years of work, all of it behind glass he could no longer touch. He put the box in his trunk, sat in the driver's seat, and did not start the car for a very long time. What Daryl did not know was that Victor Hartley had made one mistake, one small, technical, legally devastating mistake, but finding it would cost Daryl everything he had left. The first thing Daryl lost was his savings, $23,000. That is what he had in his bank account the day Victor Hartley stole his work. It sounds like a lot until you hire a lawyer. The attorney's name was Kevin Park, intellectual property specialist, office on the 14th floor of a glass building in Midtown. Kevin looked at Daryl's case, looked at the evidence, looked at the employment contract, and said 3 sentences that changed the math of Daryl's life. "You are right. Legally, this is your invention, but Hartley Medical has 12 attorneys on retainer and a litigation budget bigger than your annual salary. To fight this properly, You need around $200,000. Darryl did not have $200,000. He had $23,000. And after 2 months of retainer fees, document preparation, and filing motions, he had $411. Kevin Park called him into his office on a Tuesday, sat him down, and was honest in the way that only lawyers who still have a conscience can be. Darryl, I believe in your case, but I cannot keep working without payment. And even if I could, Hartley's team will bury us in motions and delays. They are not trying to win on merit. They are trying to drain you until you quit. That is how the system works. Not always, but often enough that it should keep you up at night. If you have money, you can defend your rights. If you do not, your rights still exist. They just sit on a piece of paper that nobody reads. Darryl lost his apartment in month 4. The rent was $1,700 a month. Without a job, without savings, the math was simple. He moved in with his college friend Ray, who had a couch and a generous heart, but also a wife and 2 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Orange. 6 weeks. That is how long generosity lasts, when space is tight and tension is real. Ray's wife never said anything directly, but Darryl could feel it. The way she closed the kitchen cabinets, a little too hard. The way silence replaced conversation when he walked into a room he left before they had to ask. The shelter on Atlantic Avenue had 42 beds. Darryl got bed number 17, thin mattress, thin blanket, lights out at 10, wake up at 6. The man in bed, 16, talked in his sleep. The man in bed, 18, smelled like something that had gone wrong a long time ago. Darryl applied for jobs. Dozens. Biomedical engineer positions at companies across New Jersey and New York. He had a degree from Rutgers. He had 8 years of industry experience. He had published research and a list of references that should have opened doors. Every door closed, because Victor Hartley had made calls, not publicly, not in any way that could be traced or proven, but in the quiet back-channel way that powerful people destroy careers they no longer find useful. Hiring managers would call Hartley Medical for a reference check and hear words like unreliable, violated company policy, not recommended. And that was that. By month 8, Darryl was sleeping in the back pew of a church in Flatbush that left its doors unlocked at night. He owned 1 bag, 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and the hard drive that contained every piece of research he had ever done on the membrane. He carried that hard drive the way some people carry photographs of their children. It was proof that the work was his, proof that 3 years of his life had produced something that mattered, proof that he was not what Victor Hartley's lawyers were trying to make him, a nobody, a liar, a disgruntled former employee with delusions. If you are still with me, stay close, because what Darryl discovered next is the moment this entire story pivots, and you are not going to want to miss it. Subscribe now so you do not lose this thread. Darryl spent his days at the Brooklyn Public Library on Grand Army Plaza. Free internet, free electricity, free warmth. He sat at the same computer terminal every morning and taught himself patent law, not because he wanted to, but because he could not afford to pay anyone else to do it. And in month 10, sitting in that library at 8:47 on a Wednesday morning, Darryl found the mistake. Victor Hartley's patent application described the biofiltration membrane in detail, but it was missing something, a critical step in the fabrication process. The step where the cellulose fibers are treated with a specific enzyme solution at a precise temperature for exactly 92 minutes. Without that step, the membrane would filter particles, but not bacteria. It would be a good product, but not a revolutionary one. Darryl knew that step because he had invented it, spent 4 months perfecting the temperature and timing. It existed only in his personal research notes. On his hard drive, Victor did not know that step, because Darryl had never shared it. He had shared everything else. But this one piece, this last piece, he had kept for himself, not out of suspicion, out of timing. He was planning to add it to the patent application the week he was fired. That missing step was the crack in Victor Hartley's stolen wall, and Darryl was going to drive a truck through it. In month 12, Darryl found Jerome Washington, or rather, Jerome found him. A legal aid volunteer at the library had seen Darryl researching patent law every day for weeks and passed his name to Jerome, a patent attorney based in Harlem, a man who had spent 20 years fighting for inventors who looked like Darryl, people with ideas worth millions and bank accounts worth nothing. Jerome reviewed the case in one afternoon, called Darryl the next morning. "Here is what we are going to do. We are not going to sue Hartley. Not yet. We do not have the money for that. What we are going to do is file a provisional patent under your name, your real research, including the enzyme treatment step that Hartley's filing is missing. That provisional patent creates a legal timestamp. It proves that you possess knowledge the supposed inventor does not have. And once that is on file, we initiate a derivation proceeding with the patent office. That is how we prove who the real inventor is. Now, here is something most people do not know. A provisional patent in the United States costs about $150 to file. It does not give you a full patent. What it gives you is 12 months of protection. 12 months where your invention is officially on record as yours. Think of it as a placeholder, a legal bookmark that says, "I was here first." For someone like Darryl, who could not afford the $15,000 a full patent application costs, it was the only weapon available. Jerome filed the paperwork. Everything was ready. The deadline for submission was 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. Today, this morning. But there was one last step. Darryl needed to call Jerome to confirm 3 final technical specifications before the filing could be submitted. Without that call, the application was incomplete. Without that call, the deadline would pass. Without that call, Victor Hartley would win. And at 7 a.m. this morning in the hallway of the shelter on Atlantic Avenue, a man Darryl had never seen before grabbed his phone out of his hand and ran. Darryl chased him for 2 blocks. Lost him at the intersection of Flatbush and 4th. Stood on the sidewalk, hands on his knees, breathing hard. No phone, no way to call Jerome, no money for a payphone. The library did not open until 10. The deadline was 5. And that is how a man who built something that could save millions of lives ended up at a bus stop in Brooklyn, with nothing, asking strangers if he could borrow a phone, and getting told no, again and again and again, until he got to Mary. 9:55 a.m. The B38 bus stop on Fulton Street. Sun sitting high and sharp over Brooklyn, the kind of morning that does not care what you are going through. Bright and warm and completely indifferent. 4 people waiting. A woman in nurse scrubs scrolling through her phone. A teenager with headphones so big they looked like earmuffs. An older man reading a folded newspaper. And Mary, sitting on the bench. Scrubs. Tired eyes. Phone in her right hand. Checking a text from the woman who watched Aisha after school. 11% battery. The number glowed in the top right corner of the screen like a warning. Darryl walked up from the east side of the street. His clothes told one story. Khaki pants that used to be pressed. A button-down shirt that used to be white. Shoes with soles peeling at the toe. Everything about him said, "I was not always this." The wrinkles were fresh. The dirt was recent. This was not a man who had been on the street for years. This was a man who had fallen fast and was still falling. But his back was straight. His eyes were clear, red from exhaustion but sharp, alert, and his hands. Long fingers, steady despite the trembling. The hands of a man who had spent years working with precision, who had held membrane samples thinner than a strand of hair and never torn one. He approached the woman in nurse scrubs first. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could I borrow your phone for just a few minutes? I need to make one call." She shook her head without looking up. Never even saw his face. The teenager was next. Darryl tapped him on the shoulder. The kid pulled one headphone off, heard the question, put the headphone back on, turned his body away. The older man with the newspaper looked up when Darryl approached, made eye contact, and said one word, "No," then moved 3 feet to the left, as if whatever Darryl had might be contagious. 3 people, 3 refusals, and the clock in Darryl's head kept ticking. He almost did not ask Mary. He was one more rejection away from giving up and walking to the library to wait for it to open. But the library was 22 blocks away. and the deadline was 7 hours away. And every minute mattered. "Excuse me. I am sorry to bother you." Mary looked up. She saw what everybody else had seen. A man who looked like he had been sleeping somewhere that was not a bed. Wrinkled clothes, unshaved face, the weight of something heavy sitting behind his eyes. But Mary saw something else too. Something the nurse and the teenager and the old man had not stayed long enough to notice. She saw the way he held himself, the way his voice shook, but his words were clear. The way he said, "I am sorry to bother you," like he meant it. Like he understood exactly how he looked, and was asking anyway, because whatever he needed was bigger than his pride. "I just need to make one phone call," Daryl said. 2 minutes, maybe 3. "It is very important. I would not ask if it was not." Mary looked at her phone. 11%. She looked at Daryl, at his hands, at his eyes. She thought about all the reasons to say no. Stranger, low battery. She needed that phone in case the school called about Aisha. And then she thought about Terrence, about a phone that died on the Belt Parkway. About 7 minutes. "Here," she held the phone out. "Just be quick. My battery is low." Daryl took the phone. His fingers brushed hers for half a second. His hand was cold. Hers was warm. And in that tiny exchange, in that 1 second of contact between two people who did not know each other's names, something shifted. Something that neither of them would understand until much later. "Thank you," Daryl said. And his voice cracked on the second word. "Would you have handed your phone to a stranger who looked like he had been sleeping on the street?" Daryl stepped 5 paces to the right, close enough that Mary could still see her phone. Far enough to give the conversation some privacy. He dialed a number from memory, the only number he had memorized in the past 14 months. Jerome Washington's direct line. The phone rang twice. Jerome picked up, and Daryl started talking. Fast, focused. The words coming out of him like water breaking through a crack in a dam. Mary was not trying to listen. She was looking at her own hands in her lap, picking at a loose thread on her scrubs. But sound carries at a bus stop, and Daryl's voice, though quiet, was intense in a way that pulled attention whether you wanted to give it or not. She heard pieces, fragments that meant nothing to her and everything to him. "Jerome, it is me. I lost my phone this morning. Stolen. Yes, I am okay. Listen, the filing. The Section 112 disclosure. We need to confirm the enzyme treatment parameters before you submit. 92 minutes at 41.5 degrees. Yes, Celsius. The prior art documentation is on pages 14 through 19 of the attachment I sent you last week. The membrane structure, the layered cellulose configuration. That is the part Hartley's filing is missing. That is what proves it is mine. Today at 5. Yes, confirm submission. Please, Jerome, today." To Mary, it sounded like a foreign language. Technical, scientific, full of numbers and terms that belonged in a textbook she had never opened, but she could hear the weight of it, the way each word landed like it mattered, the way his voice steadied as the conversation went on, as if the act of speaking these words out loud was putting something broken back together. She watched his body change during the call. When he first dialed, his shoulders were up near his ears, tight, braced. By the second minute they dropped. His free hand, which had been clenched in a fist at his side, slowly opened. His eyes closed for a moment. Not in defeat, in relief. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. That is how long the call lasted. Mary knew because she glanced at the screen when he handed the phone back. 4:22 on the call timer. 9% battery remaining. Daryl stood still for a long moment after he hung up. He stared at the phone like it was something holy. Then he turned around, walked back to Mary, and placed the phone into her hand the way you place a newborn into its mother's arms, carefully, reverently, like he understood exactly what he had been given. "Thank you," he said. His eyes were wet, not crying, but close. Closer than a man standing at a bus stop in broad daylight usually gets. "Is everything okay?" Mary asked. She did not know why she asked. She did not usually talk to strangers. But something about the way this man stood there, holding her phone like it was the last good thing in the world, made her feel like the question mattered. Daryl looked at her. looked at this woman in faded blue scrubs who had done what 3 other people would not, who had handed her phone to a man who looked like he had nothing, without asking for a reason, without demanding proof that he deserved her trust. "You just saved something that took me 3 years to build," he said. Mary did not understand. She nodded, smiled politely. The kind of smile you give when someone says something you cannot quite place. The B-38 pulled up to the curb. Brakes hissing. Doors folding open. Mary stood, dropped her phone in her pocket, picked up her bag. "I hope your day gets better," she said. She got on the bus, found a seat by the window, looked out at the stop as the bus pulled away. Daryl was still standing there, watching the bus leave, one hand raised slightly. Not quite a wave, more like a salute, a thank you that his voice could not finish. She did not ask his name. He did not ask hers. In New York, that is how most kindness works. Anonymous, unmeasured, and almost always forgotten. But this story was not over. It was barely beginning. And what happened 11 days later would prove that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever truly forgotten. 11 days later. The provisional patent for the biofiltration membrane was filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, 43 minutes before the deadline. Jerome Washington filed it from his office in Harlem. A small office, second floor of a brownstone on 125th Street. No receptionist, no conference room. Just Jerome, a printer that jammed every 3rd page, and a filing cabinet full of cases that most corporate law firms would not have touched. The filing was clean, complete. And it included one thing that Victor Hartley's patent application did not: the enzyme treatment step, the precise protocol that transformed Daryl's membrane from a good filter into a revolutionary one. 92 minutes at 41.5 degrees Celsius. A detail that existed only in Daryl's personal research notes, a detail that no one at Hartley Medical Systems knew, because Daryl had never shared it. That detail was the key. Now here's how patent disputes work in the United States. When 2 parties claim to have invented the same thing, the patent office can initiate what is called a derivation proceeding. Essentially, the office investigates who actually created the invention. They look at documentation, research notes, timestamps, lab records. They trace the idea back to its origin, and they determine who was first, who was real, who was telling the truth. Jerome filed for a derivation proceeding 3 days after the provisional patent went through. He submitted Daryl's hard drive, 3 years of research logs, time-stamped files, equipment purchase receipts, photos of his home lab setup with metadata showing dates that predated his employment at Hartley Medical. Victor Hartley's legal team responded with 400 pages of corporate documentation, internal memos, project codes, meeting minutes, all designed to create the impression that Daryl's membrane was a company project. But they could not explain the missing step. They could not describe the enzyme treatment protocol because they did not know it existed. When the patent office examiner asked Hartley's team to demonstrate the complete fabrication process, they could not. They got 80% of the way there. Then they hit a wall. Daryl could describe every step, because every step was his. The ruling came down 8 weeks later. The United States Patent and Trademark Office confirmed Daryl Mabry as the original inventor of the biofiltration membrane. Hartley Medical's application was invalidated. 3 companies had been watching the case: 2 pharmaceutical corporations and 1 international humanitarian organization. Within days of the ruling, all 3 submitted licensing offers. The humanitarian organization, a group that deployed clean water systems across East Africa, offered $2.4 million for an exclusive 10-year license. $2.4 million. For an invention built at a kitchen table in Newark by a man who had been sleeping in a church. Jerome called Daryl at the library. The same library. The same computer terminal. Daryl answered on the phone Jerome had bought him 2 weeks earlier. A prepaid flip phone. $35 from a bodega on Nostrand Avenue. "It is done," Jerome said. "We won." And the licensing offer is on the table. 2.4 million. They want the membrane for East Africa. Clean water for communities that have never had it. Daryl did not shout. He did not jump up. He did not pump his fist or call anyone or run out into the street. He sat in the plastic chair at Terminal Number 9 of the Brooklyn Public Library, surrounded by people who had no idea what had just happened, and he cried. Quietly. The way men cry when they have been holding it for 14 months and the dam finally breaks. Tears running down his face while his hands lay flat on the desk. Those long, careful hands that had built something extraordinary, and then watched it get stolen, and then fought like hell to get it back. And in that moment, sitting in that library, Daryl Mabry thought about a bus stop, about a woman in faded blue scrubs, about a phone with 11% battery and a 4-minute call that had saved everything. He did not know her name. But he knew her face. He knew her hands. He knew the way she had looked at him, not with pity, not with suspicion, with something simpler and rarer than both, trust. And he decided, sitting there, with tears on his face and $2.4 million on the table, that he was going to find her. Daryl started looking for her the next morning. He did not have much to go on. A bus stop on Fulton Street. A Tuesday morning around 10. A woman. Black. Early to mid-30s. Wearing light blue scrubs. A cracked phone screen. And a kindness that most people in this city had forgotten how to give. That was it. No name. No number. No last glance over her shoulder as the bus pulled away. Just the memory of her face, and the way she had said here like it was the simplest word in the English language. Daryl went back to the B38 stop the next day, sat on the same bench, wore clean clothes now. Jerome had fronted him money for a haircut, a shave, and 2 outfits from a thrift store on Nostrand Avenue. He looked like a different man sitting in the same spot. Same bench, same morning light, but everything else had changed. She did not come. He went back the next morning, and the next, and the next. 8 days straight. He arrived at 9:30 and stayed until 11. Watching every bus that pulled up, scanning every face that stepped off or stood waiting. And while he waited, Daryl saw something he had never paid attention to before, the invisible world of people who ride the bus at 7, 8, 9 in the morning, the world that keeps the city running, but never gets to sit down. He saw nurses finishing 12-hour overnight shifts, still in their scrubs, eyes half closed, holding coffee like a lifeline. He saw construction workers in steel-toed boots, carrying lunchboxes packed the night before because buying food on site cost too much. He saw mothers in business casual dropping kids at daycare and sprinting to the stop because being 2 minutes late meant getting written up, and getting written up 3 times meant getting fired. He saw a man in a custodian's uniform reading a chemistry textbook between stops, a woman in a home aide smock doing math on her phone, adding up hours to see if she could afford her son's field trip. A teenager in a fast food visor, leaning against the shelter wall, already tired before his shift started. This was the world Mary lived in, the world of people who gave everything they had to a city that barely noticed they existed. And Daryl realized that for all his education, for all his years in a laboratory, he had been blind to it. He had been so focused on molecules and membranes that he had never stopped to see the people who cleaned his office, who drove his bus, who served his lunch. He had been invisible for 14 months, and it had taught him something that his degree from Rutgers never could. That the people the world ignores are often the ones holding it together. By day 8, Daryl was losing hope. Maybe she had changed her schedule. Maybe she only took that bus on certain days. Maybe she had moved. Maybe he would never find her and would spend the rest of his life knowing that the most important person in his story was someone he could not thank. Jerome called him that evening. "How is the search going?" "It is not," Daryl said. "I have been at that bus stop for 8 days. Nothing." Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then he asked a question that changed everything. "You said she was wearing scrubs. Light blue. What kind of scrubs?" "Hospital clinic. They looked like the kind home aides wear. Simple. No logo. Faded at the elbows." "Home health aides in Brooklyn work through agencies," Jerome said. "There are maybe 20-25 agencies that service that area. If she was heading to work on a Tuesday morning from that stop, she probably works for one of them. Start calling." Daryl started calling the next morning. Agency number 1. No Mary matching that description. Agency number 2. Same answer. 3, 4, 5. No, no, no. He worked through the list methodically. The same focus he had once applied to membrane filtration tests, he now applied to finding one woman in a city of 8 million people. Agency number 14. No one by that name on the Brooklyn route. Agency number 15. Sunrise Senior Care. A small operation based out of an office above a laundromat on Myrtle Avenue. We do have a Mary Okafor on our Brooklyn roster, the woman on the phone said. But I cannot give out personal information. Can I ask what this is? Regarding Daryl's hand tightened on the phone. His voice cracked for the second time in 3 weeks because of this woman he had never properly met. My name is Daryl Mabry. She helped me at a bus stop, and I need to thank her. If you could just pass along my name and my lawyer's number, I would be grateful. She can decide if she wants to call back. He gave the woman Jerome's office line, hung up, and waited. But when Daryl finally found Mary, he was not prepared for what he would learn about the woman who saved his future, or the reason she had given him her phone without hesitation. Jerome made the call, not Daryl, because Jerome understood something that Daryl in his eagerness had not considered. A strange man tracking down a single mother through her workplace is not a heartwarming story. It is a reason to call the police. So Jerome contacted Sunrise Senior Care, identified himself as an attorney, explained the situation in broad terms. A patent case, a phone call that mattered, a client who wanted to express his gratitude in person. He left his bar association number so they could verify he was real. The agency passed the message to Mary. Mary read it on her lunch break while sitting in Mrs. Coleman's kitchen. She read it twice. Then she put her phone down and stared at the wall for a very long time. She did not believe it. Not at first. The idea that a 4-minute phone call from a stranger at a bus stop could be connected to a patent worth millions of dollars sounded like one of those internet stories that turns out to be a scam. But the name stuck with her. Daryl Mabry. She typed it into her phone that night after Aisha went to sleep, and there it was, a local news article from 2 weeks ago. Patent dispute at Hartley Medical Systems resolved in favor of independent inventor. Daryl Mabry, biomedical engineer, biofiltration membrane, patent office ruling. TVT. Mary read the article 3 times. The words were technical, but the story was clear. A man had his work stolen. A man had lost everything fighting to get it back. And somewhere in that fight, there had been a filing deadline and a phone call. Her phone call. She called Jerome's office the next morning. They arranged a meeting for Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop on DeKalb Avenue. A public place. Daryl would bring Jerome. Mary could bring anyone she wanted. Mary brought no one. But she sat near the door, close enough to leave quickly if something felt wrong. She ordered a tea she did not drink, wrapped her hands around the warm cup, and watched the entrance. Daryl walked in at 2:15, clean-shaven, button-down shirt, pressed pants. He looked nothing like the man at the bus stop, but his eyes were the same, clear and focused, and carrying something heavy behind them. Jerome was beside him. Tall, gray suit. The kind of calm that comes from spending 20 years in courtrooms. They sat down across from Mary, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Then Daryl said, "I've been looking for you for 9 days." Mary studied his face. "You look different. I am different. Because of you." He told her everything. Not the legal version, not the technical version, the human version. He told her about the membrane, about Victor, about the 14 months, about the shelter and the library and the stolen phone and the deadline, about standing at the bus stop, asking stranger after stranger, getting told no 3 times in a row, about almost walking away. "And then you said yes," Daryl said. "You handed me your phone like it was nothing, 11% battery. You did not ask why I needed it. You did not ask for anything in return. You just said here." Mary listened. She did not interrupt. Her hands stayed wrapped around the cup of tea that was getting cold. "That 4-minute phone call saved a patent worth $2.4 million, Daryl said. "It saved 3 years of my work. It saved my name. It saved an invention that is going to bring clean water to people who have never had it. And you made it possible. Mary looked down at her hands. Rough hands, dry from washing, lotion cracked at the knuckles. The hands that bathed Mrs. Coleman every morning, that braided Aisha's hair every night, that had held a phone out to a stranger because something in her chest told her to. I did not do anything special, she said quietly. I just let you use my phone. Why? Daryl asked. Everyone else said no. 3 people looked at me and decided I was not worth helping. Why did you say yes? Mary was quiet for a long time. She looked at the table, at the window, at her hands again. Then she looked at Daryl, and she told him about Terrence, about the Belt Parkway, about the truck that ran the red light, about her husband reaching for his phone in a crushed car, about the screen lighting up for half a second and then going dark, about 17 minutes of bleeding, about a stranger who finally stopped, about an ambulance that arrived 6 minutes later, about 7 minutes. I give my phone to anyone who asks, Mary said, because I know what happens when a call does not go through. I have known it for 4 years. I carry it with me every single day. The coffee shop was quiet. Jerome looked at his hands. Daryl looked at Mary. Mary looked at the cup of tea she would never drink. 2 strangers sitting in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, connected by phone calls, one that came too late, and one that arrived just in time. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. And sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. Daryl broke the silence first. His voice was low, steady, but the kind of steady that takes effort. I want to do something for you, he said, and I need you to hear me out before you say no. Mary's back straightened. I did not help you for money. I know that. Then there is nothing to discuss. Jerome leaned forward slightly. Miss Okafor, if I may. Legally, you have no claim to anything related to the patent or the licensing deal. This is not compensation. There is no obligation here. What Daryl is proposing is entirely his choice. And frankly, he has been stubborn about it since the moment he decided to find you. Mary looked at Jerome, then back at Daryl. She waited. Daryl took a breath. The licensing deal has not closed yet. But when it does, the first payment will be significant. I want to take $50,000 from that first payment and put it into a college fund. For your daughter. Mary shook her head immediately. No, absolutely not. I cannot accept that. That is your money. You earned it. You fought for it for 14 months. You slept on the street for it. I handed you a phone for 4 minutes. Daryl did not look away. You did not just hand me a phone. You handed me 4 minutes of trust, when the entire world had decided I was not worth trusting. 3 people at that bus stop looked at me and saw someone who was not worth 4 minutes. You looked at me and saw a person. Do you know how long it had been since someone looked at me and saw a person? Mary's eyes glistened. She pressed her lips together. Her hands gripped the teacup tighter. Here is something most people do not think about. In the United States, the average cost of a 4-year college degree is over $100,000. For families earning under $40,000 a year, that number might as well be $1 million. Nearly 60% of children from single-parent households do not complete a college degree. Not because they are not smart enough, not because they do not work hard, because the math does not add up. The same impossible math that Mary did every morning when she checked her bank account. $50,000 would not pay for all of Aisha's college, but it would pay for enough of it that the math might finally work. Mary was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. If you do this, it cannot just be for Aisha. Daryl tilted his head. What do you mean? I mean that Aisha is not the only child in Brooklyn whose mama checks her bank account every morning and prays the numbers changed overnight. If you want to put money into education, put it into a fund, a real fund. For kids like Aisha, kids whose parents work 2 jobs and still cannot afford a textbook, call it whatever you want, but make it bigger than just my daughter. Daryl looked at Jerome. Jerome raised his eyebrows slightly. The kind of expression that says, I did not see that coming, but I probably should have. You want to turn a personal gift into a scholarship fund? Jerome said. I want to make sure it helps more than one family, Mary said. Because if you are thanking me for being kind to a stranger, then the best way to thank me is to be kind to a whole lot of strangers. Daryl smiled. For the first time in 14 months, he smiled and meant it. Deal, he said. If you have been following this story from the beginning, you are not going to want to miss what happens next. Hit that subscribe button now, because the ripple effect of this moment is about to reach further than anyone imagined. Jerome Washington had a friend at the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, a reporter named Candace who covered community stories. The kind of stories that never make the front page of the big papers but matter more than anything that does. Jerome told her about Daryl and Mary over lunch one Tuesday. He did not exaggerate. He did not need to. The facts were enough. A stolen invention. A man who lost everything. A woman at a bus stop. A phone with 11% battery. A 4-minute call that saved a $2.4 million patent. Candace wrote the piece in 2 days. The headline was simple. She lent her phone to a stranger. The call he made changed both their lives. It ran on a Thursday morning in the local section. By Thursday night, it had been shared 47,000 times. By Friday, it was everywhere. Social media picked it up the way social media picks up stories that make people feel something real. People shared it with captions like, "This is why I still believe in people and faith in humanity restored, and read this and try not to cry." A mother in Chicago posted a video saying she had let a man borrow her phone at a gas station the day after reading the article. She said she almost said no. Then she thought about Mary. A businessman in Atlanta read the story and donated $10,000 to the scholarship fund. A teacher in Houston started a classroom project where students wrote about small acts of kindness that changed someone's life. The story kept growing, and then it turned its attention toward Victor Hartley. The internet is unforgiving when it finds a villain. People dug up the details of the patent dispute. They found the patent office ruling. They found Daryl's name and Victor's name and connected the dots. Comments flooded Hartley Medical's social media pages. Shareholders started asking questions. The board of directors held an emergency meeting. Victor Hartley resigned as CEO of Hartley Medical Systems 6 weeks after the article ran. Not because of the court case. The patent office had already settled that. He resigned because the shareholders decided that being associated with a man who stole an invention from his own employee was bad for business. Not bad morally, bad financially. That is the part that should bother you. He did not lose his job because what he did was wrong. He lost it because it became expensive. But here is what the article did not cover. What most people still do not know. Daryl's story is not unusual. According to data from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, fewer than 8% of patents in America are held by black inventors. 8%. In a country where black people make up over 13% of the population and have been responsible for innovations that shaped entire industries, from the traffic light to the blood bank to the carbon filament in the light bulb, the gap is not about ability. It is about access. Access to funding. Access to legal protection. Access to the kind of networks where one phone call can connect you with the right investor or the right attorney. Daryl had the ability. He always had the ability. What he did not have was a system that protected people like him. And without Jerome Washington volunteering his time, without a woman at a bus stop lending her phone, that ability would have disappeared inside a corporate filing cabinet and never seen the light of day. That is the part of this story that goes beyond two people at a bus stop. It is about who gets to invent, who gets credit, and who gets erased. But the biggest change was not the money. It was not the headlines. It was what happened inside Mary's apartment 3 months later, when her daughter Aisha asked a question that stopped Mary in her tracks. 3 months after the coffee shop, 3 months after the article, 3 months after the scholarship fund launched and the donations started coming in, and Daryl's name appeared in places that had nothing to do with courtrooms. Life had changed for Mary. Not dramatically. She still worked at Sunrise Senior Care. still visited Mrs. Coleman 5 days a week, still rode the B-38, still checked her bank account every morning, and did the same impossible math. But the math was a little less impossible now. The scholarship fund had grown beyond what anyone expected. A local community center had invited her to speak at an event about everyday kindness. She had said no 3 times before Daryl convinced her to say yes. Daryl came over for dinner on Sundays. He and Aisha would sit at the kitchen table doing her homework together while Mary cooked. He helped Aisha with science. She helped him understand what 9-year-olds actually think is cool. They were friends. Not the kind of friends the internet wanted them to be. Not the kind with a love story attached. The kind that is rarer and in some ways more valuable. 2 people who understood each other's weight because they had both carried things that almost broke them. It was a Wednesday evening, October. The apartment smelled like the chicken Mary had put in the oven an hour ago. Aisha was at the kitchen table with her homework spread out, notebook open, pencil tapping against her lip the way she always did when she was thinking hard. "Mama, what does this mean? Write about someone who changed your life." "It means pick a person who made your life different," Mary said from the stove. "Someone important to you," Aisha wrote for a while. Then she stopped. "Mama." "Yes, baby, I am writing about you," Mary smiled. "That is sweet, Aisha, but I have a question." Mary turned around. Aisha was looking at her, not the way children usually look at their parents. Not distracted. Not half paying attention. She was looking at Mary the way you look at someone when you have been thinking about something for a very long time and finally found the courage to say it. If Daddy's phone had worked that day, would he still be here? The kitchen went quiet. The only sound was the oven humming and the faucet dripping once. Twice. Mary set down the wooden spoon. She did not move. She did not speak. She stood there with her back against the counter and felt 4 years of grief rise up in her chest like a wave she had been holding back with both hands. "I do not know, baby. I think about that a lot." Aisha nodded slowly, like she had expected that answer, like she had been carrying the question long enough to know there was no good reply. Then she said something that Mary would remember for the rest of her life. "I think that is why you always let people use your phone. Because you know what happens when a call does not go through." Mary's breath caught. She stared at her daughter. This 9-year-old girl sitting at a kitchen table in Brooklyn who had just seen something that Mary herself had never been able to name. The pattern, the connection, the invisible thread that ran from a dead phone on the Belt Parkway to every stranger Mary had ever handed her phone to. She had never thought about it that way. She had never connected Terrence's death to the bus stop. She had never asked herself why she always said yes when other people said no. She just did it. The way you breathe without thinking about it. The way your heart beats without being told to. But Aisha saw it. Children see things like that. They see patterns that adults are too busy surviving to notice. Too busy working and cooking and checking bank accounts and braiding hair and catching buses and holding everything together with both hands to stop and ask why. Aisha saw what no one else did. That Mary's kindness was not random. It was not just good manners or a generous nature. It was grief transformed into generosity. It was loss redirected into love. It was a woman who could not save her husband, making sure that nobody else would ever stand next to a dead phone and feel the world go dark. Mary walked to the table, sat down next to Aisha, and held her daughter without saying a word. Held her the way you hold someone when there is nothing left to explain. When the truth has already been spoken and all that remains is to sit with it. Outside the window, Brooklyn glowed. Streetlights and headlights and the flickering neon of the bodega on the corner. The same lights that shone on the night Terrence died. The same lights that would shine tomorrow morning when Mary handed her phone to the next person who needed it. Some questions do not need answers. They need witnesses. 8 months after a phone call at a bus stop in Brooklyn, Daryl Mabry stood in a village in western Kenya and watched a child drink clean water for the first time. The licensing deal had closed 2 months earlier. $2.4 million for exclusive use of the biofiltration membrane across East Africa. The humanitarian organization, a group called Bridgewater International, had moved faster than anyone expected. They had engineers on the ground within weeks, supply chains established within a month, and by the 6-month mark the first filtration units were installed in 3 communities along the shores of Lake Victoria. The village was called Kotieno, population around 900. There was a school with 2 classrooms, a health clinic with 1 nurse, a market that operated on Tuesdays and Fridays, and until 3 weeks ago, no access to clean drinking water. The women of Kotieno had been walking to a river 2 hours away every morning. They carried yellow jerry cans on their heads, 20 liters each. 44 pounds of water balanced on the neck of a woman who had already been working since before sunrise. Children who were old enough walked with them. Children who were not stayed behind and waited. 3 hours round trip, every single day. Before breakfast, before school, before anything else. The filtration unit, that now sat at the center of the village, was small, about the size of a refrigerator. Inside it were 24 of Daryl's membranes, each one capable of filtering 500 liters per day. The cost of filtered water had dropped from 50 cents per liter to 3 cents. For a family earning less than $2 a day, that difference was not just savings, it was survival. In the first 6 months, the system served over 12,000 people across 3 villages. Cases of waterborne illness dropped by 73%. School attendance among girls increased by 41% because the hours they used to spend walking to the river they now spent in classrooms. Daryl stood at the edge of the village and watched children fill cups from the filtration tap. Small hands holding plastic cups under a stream of clear water, laughing, splashing each other, the kind of carelessness that only happens when water is no longer something you fear. His hands were still at his sides. Those same hands, the ones that had held membrane samples in a New Jersey lab, the ones that had trembled at a bus stop, the ones that had lain flat on a library desk while tears fell, those hands were steady now, quiet. Not because the trembling had stopped, but because they had finally done what they were built to do. A girl, maybe 6 or 7, walked up to Daryl and handed him a cup of water. She said something in her language that he did not understand, but the translator beside him smiled. She says, "Thank you for the water that does not make her stomach hurt." Daryl took the cup, drank, and for the first time in a very long time felt the full weight of what his life had become. Not the money, not the patent, not the ruling. This, children drinking water that would not kill them, because of something he built at his kitchen table. That evening, Daryl called Mary. Video call. He held the phone up so she could see the village, the filtration unit, the kids still playing near the tap even though the sun was going down, a woman filling a jerry can with clean water and carrying it home on her head. Same walk, same weight, but now the water was safe. "This started with your phone at a bus stop in Brooklyn," Daryl said. Mary stared at the screen, at the children, at the water catching the last of the sunlight. She sat on her couch in her apartment on Fulton Street, wearing the same faded scrubs she wore every day, and watched a village on the other side of the world drink clean water because she had said yes to a stranger. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "All I did was hand you a phone. That is all it took," Daryl said. "That is all it ever takes. One person deciding that a stranger is worth 4 minutes. They called it the 11% Foundation, named after the battery life on a phone that should have been dead, but was not." Daryl wanted a grand launch. Jerome suggested a hotel ballroom. Mary said no. She wanted the community center on Myrtle Avenue. Folding chairs, paper tablecloths, coffee from the deli across the street. That is where the fundraiser happened. A Tuesday evening in November. About 80 people, neighbors, teachers, home aides, bus drivers, a few reporters, Jerome in his gray suit, Daryl in a tie he had clearly not worn before, because the knot was slightly crooked, Aisha in the front row wearing a dress she had picked out herself, and Mary, standing behind a podium that was really just a music stand borrowed from the church next door, holding a piece of paper with notes she had written at 4 in the morning because she could not sleep. She was not a speaker. She had never stood in front of a room full of people and talked about herself. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was small. She cleared her throat twice before she started, and even then, the first few words came out almost too quiet to hear. "I am not good at this," she said. "I am good at giving people their medication on time and making sure they eat lunch and braiding my daughter's hair so tight it lasts 2 days. But talking in front of people is not something I know how to do. So I am just going to tell you what happened and hope that is enough." She told them about the bus stop, about the stranger with trembling hands, about the phone with 11% battery. She told them that she did not think about it, that she just said "here," the way she always does. And then she told them why. She told them about Terrence, about the Belt Parkway, about the phone that died, about 17 minutes of bleeding and 7 minutes too late. She told them that she had never talked about it in public before, that she was not sure she could get through it without crying. She could not, she cried, and she kept talking anyway. "I do not give people my phone because I am a good person," Mary said. "I do it because I am a scared person. I am scared of what happens when someone needs to make a call and they cannot. I have seen what that looks like. I have lived with it for 4 years." She paused, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looked at Aisha in the front row. Her daughter was crying too, but smiling. The way you smile when someone you love is finally saying the thing you always knew they carried. Mary looked back at the room. 80 people, quiet, some wiping their eyes, some just sitting very still. "I did not save anyone," she said. "I just remembered what it feels like when a phone call does not go through." She stepped away from the podium. The room was silent for 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then the applause started. Not the roaring standing ovation you see in movies, just people clapping. Some standing, some staying in their seats. The sound of ordinary people recognizing something true in the words of another ordinary person. Daryl was clapping. Jerome was clapping. Mrs. Coleman, who Mary had brought in a wheelchair, was clapping with both hands, even though her arthritis made it hurt. And Aisha. Aisha was not clapping. She was just looking at her mother with the kind of pride that 9-year-olds are not supposed to know how to feel yet. But she felt it. You could see it on her face. Mary sat down, picked up her cup of deli coffee, and, for the first time in a very long time, felt like someone had finally heard her. 1 year after the phone call. A Tuesday morning. October. The B38 bus stop on Fulton Street. Mary sat on the same bench, same spot, scrubs on, bag on her lap, phone in her right hand. She checked the battery, 8%. She was still a home health aide, still worked at Sunrise Senior Care, still visited Mrs. Coleman 5 days a week, although Mrs. Coleman had moved to an assisted living facility now, and Mary visited her there instead, still rode the bus, still checked her bank account every morning. The numbers were better now, not rich, not even comfortable, but the impossible math was a little less impossible. Aisha was in 5th grade. She had started talking about wanting to be a lawyer, not a doctor, not an engineer, a lawyer, because she said lawyers help people keep what belongs to them. Mary suspected she had been spending too much time with Jerome on Sundays. The scholarship fund had given its first 3 awards, 2 girls and 1 boy from Brooklyn, all children of single parents, all headed to college in the fall with 50% less debt than they would have had otherwise. Mary had read their application essays. One of them made her cry so hard she had to put it down and walk around the block before she could finish. Daryl had moved to a small apartment in Fort Greene. He was consulting for Bridgewater International full-time now, designing filtration systems for communities in Uganda and Somalia and the Philippines. His hands were steady, his name was his own again. And every Tuesday morning he texted Mary the same thing. Same message every week, 11%. Mary always texted back the same thing. Still enough, she was looking at her phone, smiling at the text, when a voice interrupted her. "Excuse me." Mary looked up. A young woman, maybe 19. maybe 20. Pregnant. Visibly, 6 or 7 months along. She was wearing a coat too thin for October and holding her belly with one hand. Her eyes were red, not from crying, from the kind of fear that sits behind your eyes when you are young and alone and something is happening that you do not know how to handle. Can I use your phone? I need to call my mom. Mary did not ask why. She never does. Here, she said, take your time. The girl took the phone, stepped a few feet away, dialed, waited, then spoke in a voice that cracked on the first word. Mama, I need you. Mary watched her from the bench, watched her shoulders drop when her mother answered, watched the fear in her face soften into something that looked like relief. The call lasted 2 minutes, maybe less. The girl came back, handed the phone to Mary. Thank you. Thank you so much. You do not know how much I needed that. Mary smiled. I think I do. The girl walked away. Mary looked down at her phone, 8%. She dropped it in her pocket, stood up. The B-38 was pulling around the corner. Brakes hissing, doors opening. Mary got on the bus, found a seat by the window. Same seat, same route, same Tuesday. But you and I know something that the other passengers on that bus did not. We know that the woman in the faded blue scrub sitting by the window with a phone that was almost dead was not just going to work. She was carrying something. A quiet, invisible, unshakable belief that a phone call can save a life, that 4 minutes of trust can change the world, and that saying yes when everyone else says no is not just kindness. It is a choice to believe that strangers are worth believing in. The world measures kindness in grand gestures. Viral videos, million-dollar checks, headlines with big numbers. But the kindness that actually changes lives, it is a stranger at a bus stop, a phone with 11% battery, and 4 minutes of trust. I want to step outside this story for a moment and talk to you directly. I spent a long time thinking about why this story matters, and I realized it is not because of the $2.4 million. It is not because of the patent or the clean water or the scholarship fund. Those are all beautiful outcomes, but they are not the point. The point is the moment before all of that, the moment at the bus stop, when 3 people said no and 1 person said yes. That is it. That is the whole story. Everything else is what happened because one woman decided that a stranger deserved 4 minutes of her time and 11% of her battery. And here is the part that keeps me up at night. Most of us would have said no. I probably would have said no. You probably would have too. And that would have been reasonable. Safe. Smart. Nobody would have blamed us. But Mary said yes. And the reason she said yes is the part that breaks my heart. She said yes because she had already lived through what happens when a phone call does not go through. She did not need a reason. She had a scar. And that scar turned into a reflex. And that reflex turned into a miracle. I think most acts of kindness work like that. They do not come from people who have everything. They come from people who have lost something. People who know exactly what it costs when help does not arrive in time. And one more thing. If you or someone you know has ever invented something and wondered how to protect it, look into what is called a provisional patent. It costs about $150. You can learn about it on the United States Patent and Trademark Office website. That one filing could be the difference between keeping your life's work and watching someone else put their name on it. It is one of the most important and least known tools available to everyday inventors, especially those who do not have the money for a full patent right away. Now, I want to be honest with you. This story is a work of fiction. Mary and Daryl are not real people. The bus stop, the phone call, the patent, the village in Kenya, all of it came from imagination. But the issues behind the story are very real. Intellectual property theft happens every day in this country. Black and minority inventors hold less than 8% of U.S. patents. That is not because they invent less. It is because the system was not built to protect them equally. And small acts of kindness between strangers, those happen every day too. They just do not usually come with a $2.4 million ending. If this story felt real, it is because stories like this are happening right now. On a bus stop somewhere, in a library somewhere, in a kitchen lab somewhere, without the cameras, without the headlines, without anyone noticing. If Mary's story moved you, if it made you think about the small kindnesses you have given or received, if it made you look at a stranger a little differently, then I have one request. Subscribe to this channel, not because I need the numbers, but because stories like this deserve to be told. And the more of us who listen, the more of us who might say yes the next time someone asks. Leave me a comment. Tell me, have you ever done something small for a stranger that turned out to mean more than you realized? Or has a stranger ever done something small for you that changed everything? I want to hear your story, because I guarantee it matters more than you think. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who is feeling invisible, someone who thinks their small acts of kindness do not count, share this video with them. Let them know that what they do matters, even when nobody sees it, especially when nobody sees it. Until next time, be the person who says yes at the bus stop.